Baku is once again at the center of the global agenda. On the surface, it seems like an ordinary day. In the capital, diplomatic meetings where politicians discuss the future of cooperation. In some outskirts, temporary power outages. And in offices, scientists anxiously examine maps and charts, recording the catastrophic drop in the water level of the Caspian Sea. But when you connect all these facts, the picture becomes far more dramatic. Azerbaijan, which for many years balanced between different centers of power, is now trying to play on several chessboards at once. On one hand, contacts with NATO, which are not only about joint programs but also about a symbolic signal. The country is strengthening its position with the West. On the other hand, the ecological disaster in the Caspian, which threatens the entire regional economy. And in addition to this, closer ties with the United States, where even loud phrases are being heard, such as a Nobel Prize for Trump. The contrast is striking. Diplomatic smiles and international statements are layered over very real problems. Because the falling water level of the Caspian is not just numbers. It's a threat to fish stocks, oil export routes, and even energy security. And if today we are talking about -20-30 centimeters annually, tomorrow this could mean a complete restructuring of the region's transport system. The contrast is striking. Diplomatic smiles and international statements are layered over very real problems, because the falling water level of the Caspian is not just numbers. It's a threat to fish stocks, oil export routes, and even energy security. And if today we are talking about -20-30 centimeters annually, tomorrow this could mean a complete restructuring of the region's transport system. In this tense context, Azerbaijan is trying to show that it is not a victim of circumstances, but an active player. Baku wants to be the place where NATO, the US, and the Caspian neighbors negotiate. But can the country hold its ground in this complicated game, where every smile hides a deeper bet? That's what we'll explore further. At the beginning of the week, a meeting with a NATO delegation took place in Baku. At first glance, a routine visit as part of the 2025 cooperation program. Events like this usually remain in the shadows, mentioned only in dry press releases. But this time, the attention was far higher than usual. Because the very fact that Azerbaijan is hosting alliance representatives right now, at a time when the region is undergoing serious transformations, has become a symbolic event. The official agenda included discussions on security, military modernization, participation in peacekeeping operations, and most importantly, the exchange of expertise in the field of cybersecurity. For NATO, this is an opportunity to expand its sphere of influence and demonstrate readiness to support partners in the South Caucasus. For Baku, it's a chance to show the world that it can maneuver between major players and use cooperation with the West as a counterbalance to pressure from other centers of power. At the same time, far more troubling news is emerging in Azerbaijan. Scientists are sounding the alarm. The Caspian Sea's water level is dropping rapidly. Over the past 30 years, the water has receded by almost 2.5 meters, and the last few years have been especially critical, -20-30 centimeters annually. To the average person, this might seem like just water, but for the region it means an entire chain of problems. Fishing grounds are disappearing, rare animal species are under threat, and shipping routes are at risk. Along with that, the future of oil infrastructure, which is tied to the Caspian. That is why negotiations are underway in Baku and other Caspian capitals about joint monitoring and adaptation programs. But behind closed doors, officials admit there is no magic button. The process is global in nature. The drop in water levels is connected to climate change, human activity, and cyclical natural processes. For Azerbaijan, it's also the risk of losing its key position as a transport and energy hub. As if these challenges weren't enough, on the same day, in a settlement on the outskirts of Baku, Balajar, the electricity was temporarily cut off. Formally, it was due to repair work. But in a climate where attention is fixed on infrastructure vulnerabilities and energy issues, even a local outage is perceived symbolically. Social media quickly filled with jokes. No lights, but at least NATO showed up. And all of this against the backdrop of US diplomatic activity. The American ambassador in Baku emphasized that Washington views Azerbaijan as a key partner, especially now that relations with Armenia are beginning to normalize. This isn't just about the military sphere, but also about technology, energy, education, and even artificial intelligence. There was even a loud phrase: former US President Donald Trump, who played an important role in this rapprochement, could be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Thus, in the span of a single day, Baku became the intersection of three storylines: military cooperation with NATO, the ecological disaster of the Caspian, and diplomatic rapprochement with the US, and each one directly affects the country's future. The NATO visit to Baku sparked a storm of discussion both inside the country and abroad. Official media presented the meeting in the most neutral tone possible, a routine cooperation event, nothing unusual. But analysts noted that the level of attention from Western delegations was far higher than usual. For Moscow, this step was a troubling signal. Azerbaijan is demonstratively strengthening its ties with the alliance. In Russian expert circles, people are already saying that Baku is crossing a red line and risks losing the Kremlin's trust. Turkey's reaction was more restrained. As a NATO member, Ankara also sees Azerbaijan as its brotherly ally. Turkish commentators pointed out that Baku's stronger ties with the alliance only strengthen the position of the entire Turkic world. At the same time, behind the scenes they admit, too close a rapprochement with the West could complicate coordination with Russia and Iran. Among ordinary Azerbaijanis, impressions were divided. Young people, especially in Baku, generally viewed the NATO visit positively. For them, it symbolizes openness, modernization, and a chance to move closer to European standards. The older generation, however, is more cautious. Memories of the Soviet past are still fresh, and the idea of being closer to the West raises concerns about whether this might bring new problems. On social media, comments like these could be seen: "NATO came," which means sanctions are coming soon, or "the main thing is that friendship with the West doesn't cost us peace with our neighbors." When it comes to the Caspian Sea crisis, the reaction is far more unified. Scientists, environmentalists, fishermen, business people, everyone understands the situation is critical. In Azerbaijan, there's active discussion that falling water levels could affect thousands of jobs, undermine shipping, and damage oil exports. In neighboring countries, from Kazakhstan to Iran, similar concerns are voiced. Notably, the ecological issue has temporarily united even those who usually argue. Politicians, experts, and civic groups agree that the Caspian must be saved. The electricity outage in Balajar also didn't go unnoticed. Local residents responded with irony, posting photos on social media with captions like, "While NATO discusses security, we have no power." Memes spread through the Azerbaijani internet segment, turning a local failure into a symbol that big politics often runs parallel to everyday problems. Special attention was drawn to the American ambassador's words about Donald Trump's role. In the US, Trump's supporters picked up on this theme, seeing the diplomat's remarks as an argument in favor of his political comeback. In Azerbaijan, part of society viewed it as a compliment, while others reacted with confusion. Why should we thank the Americans for reconciling with our neighbors? That was our decision, not theirs. Thus, the reaction to events in Baku turned out to be multi-layered. For some, it's a chance at a new future. For others, a risky game. But nearly everyone agreed on one point: Azerbaijan can no longer remain on the sidelines of global politics. To understand why the events in Baku caused such a strong reaction, one must look at the map and at history. Azerbaijan has always been at the crossroads of civilizations, between Russia, Turkey, Iran, and the Caspian Sea. Each of these powers has had, and still has, its own interests in the region. That is why any step Baku takes toward NATO or the US is perceived not as a routine diplomatic gesture, but as a strategic decision with far-reaching consequences. Azerbaijan's relationship with NATO dates back to the 1990s, when the country joined the Partnership for Peace program. At that time, it was mostly symbolic cooperation, training, exchanges, participation in certain missions. But even then, Russia closely monitored to make sure Baku didn't cross the line of partnership and begin a full-fledged dialogue on joining the alliance. Today's meeting recalls those times, but now the stakes are higher. The conflict in Eastern Europe has made the NATO issue much more sensitive, and any movement toward the alliance is perceived in Moscow as painful. The ecological crisis of the Caspian adds yet another layer to this context. A drop in sea level by 2.5 meters over 30 years is not just a number, it's the destruction of an established balance. In Soviet times, the Caspian was considered an internal sea, with issues of shipping and resource extraction decided in Moscow. After the USSR collapsed, 5 countries gained access to the resources and began exploiting them actively. Today, the shrinking water area means that oil and gas export routes are under threat. This strikes at the entire regional energy strategy, including the interests of Russia and Europe. But the deeper context goes even wider. For the US, Azerbaijan is not only an energy ally, it is also a foothold for controlling transport corridors that connect the Caspian with Europe and Asia. That is why the diplomatic package also includes topics like technology, education, and artificial intelligence. Washington fully understands the future is determined not only by oil, but also by digital capacity. Iran, meanwhile, views Azerbaijan's rapprochement with NATO as a direct threat. Tehran traditionally considers the Caspian part of its strategic sphere of influence, and it reacts painfully to any increase in Western presence. For Iran, the falling water level is both an ecological and a security problem. Shifting routes could open new opportunities for NATO's military presence. Turkey plays a special role. On the one hand, Ankara is interested in Azerbaijan strengthening its position within the alliance, as this also enhances Turkey's own influence. On the other hand, Turkish diplomacy understands too sharp a pivot toward the West could ruin the balance with Moscow and Tehran. That's why Turkey tries to act as both mediator and big brother, keeping Baku from taking excessive risks. Inside Azerbaijan, the context is no less complicated. The country's economy largely depends on oil and gas exports, which means on the stability of routes through the Caspian and the Caucasus. At the same time, the government is eager to show that it is open to new technologies and ready for partnership with the United States. The result is a two-layered strategy: external insurance through NATO and the US, while cautiously maintaining contacts with Russia and Iran. Thus, Baku finds itself in a situation where every move becomes part of a larger geopolitical chess game. The ecological crisis, diplomatic activity, and the NATO visit are all intertwined in a knot that cannot be untied with a single decision. At first glance, Azerbaijan can chalk up several serious successes. The visit of the NATO delegation to Baku is a signal not only to its neighbors, but also to the world. The country is positioning itself as an independent player, ready to cooperate with leading military structures. For the domestic audience, it is an argument that Azerbaijan is capable of conducting dialogue on equal footing with major powers, not simply reacting to outside circumstances. The second success lies in the diplomatic track with the US. If in the early 2000s contacts with Washington were mostly limited to energy, today the discussion covers a much broader spectrum, from technology and education to artificial intelligence. For Baku, this is an opportunity to diversify its foreign policy and attract investment into new sectors. It also sends a strong message to its neighbors. Azerbaijan is showing that it can go beyond the oil economy and is ready to move toward a digital future. But alongside these successes stand obvious risks. First and foremost, the environment. The situation with the Caspian Sea cannot be resolved quickly. Joint monitoring, agreements, round tables, all this creates the appearance of activity but does not solve the problem itself. If the water level continues to fall, Azerbaijan will face enormous costs, rebuilding ports, changing supply routes, and finding new ways to transport resources. And all this against the backdrop of global competition for energy markets. Another risk comes from balancing interests. Strengthening ties with NATO and the US automatically provokes irritation in Moscow and Tehran. Russia traditionally considers the South Caucasus part of its sphere of influence, while Iran views any Western presence in the Caspian as a threat. That means every step Azerbaijan takes toward the West could be met with countermeasures, from political pressure to economic restrictions. In this sense, foreign policy successes could quickly turn into new challenges. Internal reaction must not be overlooked either. Young people see ties with NATO and the US as a step forward, but more conservative parts of society worry that too much closeness with the West will bring not only benefits but also new obligations. Azerbaijani society is not uniform, and the government will have to consider different moods to prevent division. Finally, the symbolic moment, the power outage in Balajar. Yes, it was only scheduled maintenance, but perception plays a huge role. When, against the backdrop of loud statements about security and technology, residents are left without electricity, it undermines trust in the authorities. People begin to ask, how can we talk about global strategies if our basic problems remain unsolved? This contrast became a reminder that success on the international stage must be backed by stability at home. Thus, the picture is mixed. On one hand, Azerbaijan has strengthened its position on the global map. The NATO visit and US activity showed that Baku is being taken seriously. On the other hand, the problems of the Caspian, internal contradictions, and pressure from neighbors could quickly turn those successes into sources of new risks. These days, Baku became an arena where several storylines converged at once. NATO diplomacy, alarm over the Caspian, and American promises of future partnership. For some, these are signs of Azerbaijan's strength and independence. For others, a game with fire, where a single wrong move could cost too much. It is symbolic that all this was accompanied by a brief power outage in one of the districts. It was almost like a metaphor. The country is taking steps on the world stage, discussing the future of technology and global alliances, but at the same time remains vulnerable in the simplest things. And that is Baku's main challenge: to connect ambition with reality, big plans with everyday stability. Can Azerbaijan keep its balance on this tightrope, maintaining equilibrium between the West, Russia, Turkey, and Iran? Will it find solutions for the catastrophic drop in the Caspian's water levels, on which the economy and ecology of the entire region depend? Or will the loud statements about new cooperation remain only words, while domestic problems continue to deepen? The answers to these questions remain open. But one thing is clear: Baku can no longer afford the luxury of being just an observer. It has become part of the great game, where the stakes are not only the country's future, but the future of the entire region. And now the question to you: do you think this is the beginning of a new era for Azerbaijan, or a dangerous path where every step is a risk?